The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in this episode are that of the guest and host and do not necessarily reflect the values of sponsors or other associated organizations. Welcome to the Parental Compass. I am your host, Bobby Williams. Hey, you know the deal. Like, share, subscribe. Make a social media post about this show. Share your opinions on it. Thank you. It's the holiday season. And oftentimes, that can be stressful. It's the time when a lot of families are getting together, and oftentimes family members can have very different ideas about the world. Tends to come up in conversation. Well, my guest today is Erin Jones. Erin Jones is a consultant and public speaker who has done amazing work all across the state of Washington. Erin also has a lot of really valuable life experience in the field of tough conversations. So we're going to be talking all about that because sometimes the tough conversations are the ones that you need to have the most. So let's deep dive in. But first, here's a quick word from AmeriGroup. We're all filling a lot of different roles in life. Parent, coworker, friend. Well, AmeriGroup offers whole care for the whole you. It's all covered. Doctor visits, prescriptions, extra vision benefits, and even help gain your GED. Visit chooseamerigroup.com/WA.
As a parent, as a member of a family, they can't see me on the podcast, but I am biracial. I am Black and white. I was abandoned at birth because I was Black and white. I was adopted by a white family who was then not disowned by their family, but really not completely accepted either. So this dynamic of having hard conversations is right in my own family. And so, my parents had to deal with hard conversations around race really early on. I'm almost 50 now, and they've been having to have these conversations or not having them with their own family for the last 50 years.
Wow.
They moved us to Europe, and I went to the United Nations school where we had kids in my school whose countries were at war. And so for me, I've been watching hard conversations, been a part of hard conversations really since I was a little girl. And I think I always knew from the time I was 9 or 10, I want to be part of facilitating and being a bridge for hard conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah.
We have a lot of families getting together right now. It's the holiday time. And I think one thing with tough conversations is it's hard for people not to feel attacked, or it's like you don't want to come at someone and just be like, well, you're a racist. Because, you're not going to get anywhere with that approach. But I mean, how can you do that? Like talk to someone and make it not feel like an attack?
So I think I talk a lot about having a posture of curiosity. I also talk a lot about 3 words, humility, humanity, and history. So I talk about the humility of showing up to just any conversation with the humility that you don't know it all. So you may think you have a posture on a particular thing, or you may think that you're an expert. You're not. Stop it. Unless you have a PhD, which most people don't anyway. Show up with the humility that you still have stuff to learn. Humanity. So humility is the first word. Humanity. Center the humanity of every person that you're talking to. So whether they already are voting in a way that you don't agree with, you've heard them say things about race that let you know you probably don't agree, whatever the difference is, show up and center their humanity and choose to see them as somebody of equal value to you and get curious about how did they get there. And that leads to number 3. So humility, don't know it all. 2, humanity, they are valuable. 3, everybody has a story. And so everyone has a story about how they got to this particular position. And if you can just get curious about their story and share your story, that's how we find common ground. And so I find that when we're talking to family, if we can just get underneath and get really curious about, I tell people, ask the question. When someone says something really, you perceive it to be stupid or ignorant, say, wow, how did you come to that understanding? What happened in your life that caused you to believe that thing to be true? Tell me more about that. And
Hmm.
to really take a posture of curiosity. Don't just listen with a response already formed in your head. Listen clearly, carefully, all the way through, and then ask more questions.
I think just being a good listener is so important. Or so often when people are talking, you're kind of thinking about the next thing you want to say. And yeah, I really appreciate that. I've heard people talk a lot about safe spaces, and sometimes I think people get almost carried away with it. Like anything that makes me feel uncomfortable is unsafe. And it doesn't seem like these conversations can always be a safe space. I mean, what do you think about that?
Actually, don't talk about safe spaces. I'm pretty explicit in the work that I do.
Uh-huh.
I say there are no safe spaces. So I talk about brave spaces. And in brave spaces, we acknowledge that these things are not comfortable, that you're going to feel uncomfortable in talking about religion, politics. I mean, there are the things that we're not supposed to talk about in this country. And part of the reason we are where we are is because I think we've been waiting for safety. And so we just don't talk about stuff. And then we're thinking stuff, we're acting in ways, but
Hmm.
if we don't ever talk, how can we ever get to unity and community? I agree with you. There's no such thing as a safe space when we're talking about these big things, politics, religion, those kinds of things. So we got to get brave with one another. And if we center each other's humanity and our community, if we center that, then we can get brave enough to be uncomfortable, to have those hard conversations, and to not take it as a personal attack when someone disagrees. They just disagree. They're coming from a different perspective. They have a different life experience. They've had different encounters with people. And if we can kind of save room for that, that's where the real good conversations are. And so I tell people discomfort is guaranteed. Like you're going to be uncomfortable. Don't try to fix people. You can't fix people. All you can do, you have control of yourself. You have
Yeah.
control of how you show up. You don't have control over anyone else. Show grace. Show grace for yourself when you mess up, because you're going to mess up sometimes too, but also show grace for the people you're having conversations with.
Hmm. Do you think you ever really change anyone's mind in these conversations? Because I think about people when they're adults. Oftentimes, people are really set in their ways. You know.
So I mean, I'll give you an example, a great example of something that I've personally experienced. I'm an optimist. So I do believe, as a teacher, I believe that anyone's mind can be changed, including my own. So I'm going to start with me,
Mhm.
including my own. I can change my mind. And if I can change my mind, then other people's minds can be changed too. So this is a great example of something like this. So I ran for state superintendent 4 years ago, lost by 1 point. But
Ooh.
what happened out of that is a bunch of people started following me on social media. And I have a particular gentleman who started following me 5 years ago when I first started my campaign. I didn't know he was following me. He never commented on anything I posted. But about 2 years ago, he sent me a private message and he said, "Hey, Erin, my name is John. I was raised on a neo-Nazi compound in
Whoa.
Idaho." He said, "But I started following you when you ran for office." And he said, "I think what I've learned over the last 4 years," he'd been following me for 4 years. He said, "I think what I've learned is that I need to learn to love differently." He said, "You love differently. And I think there's something I can learn from you." Do you know that John and I today are really good friends?
Hmm.
Black lady and white former neo-Nazi are really good friends. I would call him like a brother to me. So I do believe that you can change people's minds, um, but it requires patience. You're not going to change someone's mind in a day. You're not going to change them in one conversation. You have to see it as a long game. And so what I tell folks is you have to be willing to be in it long term. You have to show a lot of patience, a lot of grace, and you have to really stay curious. You have to stay in that posture of curiosity and not allow one disagreement to stop you from that conversation. And he and I don't agree on everything still. Like I don't understand his perspective on guns. I don't
Mhm.
understand guns and NRA. But you know what? I love John. Even though we don't agree on everything, I have learned to love John and he's learned to love me.
Yeah. It seems like society is always gradually changing too, or like a word you might have said 10 years ago, or someone might have said today is like, what's going on? What about if someone's not willing to engage with this attitude of curiosity and all these things? Like, what if they're just kind of there to talk trash and be ignorant or something?
So it's so funny because I just got out of a meeting talking about this literally 10 minutes ago.
Wow.
I have a rule for myself that I am very careful about who I engage. So if it becomes clear early on that this person is not in this to grow or learn, they're not in it with the intention of making me better, they're in it to be right or to be a jerk, I don't have any energy for that, and I won't give them my energy. My energy is too precious to give away that way. And so you don't have to agree with me, but it has to be apparent to me pretty early on that you're at least open to listening. And again, it may take years down the road for us to come to any agreement, but if it's obvious to me that you're just trying to be a jerk, you're just trying to, a lot of times they're just trying to hate for no reason other than just wanting to hate and get a rise out of you. You do not deserve my energy then, and I refuse to give it. So I don't invest in those kinds of conversations, and I think it's bullying behavior. I think it's attention-getting behavior, and there are too many people that are willing to listen and engage in hard conversations that I don't have time for that.
Do you have any good stories from like family gatherings you've been at where you've gotten kind of deep down into it?
So for me, no, partly because our family lives all over the world, really. So I was born in the United States, but raised in Europe. So we lived on 2 different continents most of my life. And so most of the times that we came back to the United States, it was just for a short time and we had fun. But actually, you know what? The more I say this, let me share one experience. So my mother's stepmother and our family did not get along at all, not at all. And so we never saw them from the time I was a little girl until I was an adult. We just never had any contact with them. And I ended up getting 2 tryouts for the WNBA at 28 years old. And then at 30, I was invited to play basketball against the Mexican Olympic team in Mexico for a week. And I came back from that trip, and my cousin called me, and he's a basketball coach. And he said, Erin, I need you to come to Minnesota to coach this camp with me because my kids here have never met anyone like you. Now, my cousin is this tow-headed blonde, 6'6" guy. I don't look at all like my cousins, but we're all 6 feet taller. We are all basketball players. We're all teachers. And so even though I'm adopted, like we're connected. My dad's side, we're really connected. And so he invites me out to Minnesota. Well, I knew that on my mom's side, my mom's mom, we'd had no contact, but I knew that he lived in the same small town that she lived in. And so I told my cousin, Bill, I will only come to Minnesota to coach if you arrange for me to talk to grandma. He's like, ooh, are you sure you want to talk to grandma? He knew that we did not have a relationship. And we suspected it was over a race, but we just didn't have any relationship. So I fly out to Minnesota. He drops me off at her retirement home. Mind you, I haven't seen her, right? Like we've had no relationship. And she shows up at her door and she has a shoebox in her hands. And in that shoebox, my mother, without telling me, had sent her mother my school pictures every year, even though we had no contact with her. She'd been sending her my school pictures and my certificates and newspaper clippings all these years. And my 86-year-old grandma has this box and she's been crying all day. And her eyes are puffy and she welcomes me into her living room. And here are the words she says. Erin, do you know you were the favorite grandchild out of 18? We just never told you because you're, and she used the N-word. She used the N-word with the at the end, like that N-word. And I just remember my eyes got big and I was like, Grandma, you can't use that word. You can't use that word. And my little white 4'11" grandma says these words, what do I call you then? Mm-hmm. And that was the moment I realized, oh my gosh, we have not had contact for 30 years not because she hated me, but because she didn't know how to talk to me. Because in Minnesota culture, you don't talk about this stuff. So we lost 30 years of life with my grandma because we just never talked about this stuff. And
so
she
it wasn't even like a place of hate. It was like a lack of communication.
Yes. And so here's what she said. Here were the last words she said to me. Erin, can you ever forgive us? Your grandfather went to his grave and he never got to tell you how much he loved you. And I held my grandma for about an hour. And I would go on to coach that basketball camp, and she died 3 months later.
Wow.
We lost 30 years of life because we didn't have the hard conversation. And guess what? The conversation didn't even need to be hard. We just needed to have it. And so here's what I would say to families as we enter this holiday season. There are some conversations that you've been avoiding, and maybe they're about race, maybe they're about gender, maybe they're about sexual orientation, maybe they're about religion. Have the conversation, because I don't want you all to lose 30 years of life with your family because you've been too scared to have this conversation. You've been dancing around it for all these years. Have the conversation. And yes, it will be hard and uncomfortable. There's nothing like hearing your grandma call you the N-word. That is hard. And I walked out of her house able to love my grandma for the first time because we were able to finally have that really hard conversation.
Yeah. Even the idea of letting go of grudges too seems so important.
Yeah.
Well, let's circle this back. This show is all about parenting. Why is it important for your children to see you having these types of tough conversations?
I think, my husband and I are both teachers. We've raised 3 adult children. So our kids are 23, 24, and 26 right now. I think our son articulated this best just a couple weeks ago, actually. 2 of our kids are in college and they're home now because of COVID. So they're doing school from home. And I think what came up in some way was, how had we raised them and what had we really taught them? And one of the things our son said is, Mom and Dad, you modeled for us. You modeled for us. So here's how I would translate and answer your question. We as adults, as parents, often tell our kids what to do, but we don't show them what to do. Our kids are watching us more than they're listening. They are watching our behavior more than we are listening to how. And so what our children saw is my husband and I have hard conversations with people. We are willing to engage in hard conversations, not just with our family, but with neighbors, with colleagues. And our children have watched us have hard conversations in grace-filled ways, not yelling at people, but showing up curious, showing up listening well, showing up with compassion, showing up with grace. We have asked for forgiveness and we've forgiven people in front of our children. And so what I would say to you parents is so much of parenting is actually not what we say, it's what we do. Parents, it's important who you choose to surround yourself with. So when it comes to race, who are the friends in your circle? If your children are seeing everyone who looks just like you, and that's your only friend circle, you're sending them a message about who's important and who's not. And so think about who's in your friend circle. Who are you having dinner with? Who are you calling? Who are you following on social media? Your children are watching you. And so what are the messages, even in the things that you haven't really thought about until this moment? What are the messages you want your children to intake? You have to model them. You can't just talk about them. You've got to live it out. And then here's the other thing. When you make a mistake as a parent, which you will, y'all, you will. If you have not yet, your children must be really little. When you make a mistake, apologize. Apologize to your children. And those are really powerful lessons that your children will take with them for the rest of their lives.
Awesome. Well, this has been great. Do you have any closing thoughts or anything you'd like to share with the audience here?
I just want to remind you again, my 3 words that I live by every day. I try to live this out again, not just talk about it, but model it. Humility, humanity, history. Be humble enough to know as a parent, you don't know it all. You don't know it all. Just because we're older doesn't mean we know everything. So show up even with your children and be clear that you don't know everything. 2, center their humanity too. When they do stupid stuff, which they will do, okay, call them on it, but don't make them feel humiliated, right? Center their humanity in that. Help them to understand that part of being human is that you're going to make a mistake. Help them get back up, right? So humility, don't know it all, humanity. Man, they are valuable human beings. Even when they're being stupid and doing stupid stuff, they're still valuable human beings. And then history. We all have a story. We've all made mistakes. We've all had success. And so being willing to be transparent with our children and share pieces of our story so they can learn from us, even in the mistakes that we've made. We can be honest about those and help our children not fall into those same traps too. So humility, humanity, and history. I'd end with that.
Great. Well, Erin, just thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show and be here.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, good episode. I encourage you, go to YouTube and type in Erin Jones TED Talk. Erin has some amazing TED Talks up there. That's today's program. Thank you, Family Education and Support Services and AmeriGroup. Everyone, just have a happy, safe, healthy holiday season. We'll see y'all next time. Peace.